We often assume that intelligence is a shield. We believe that the capacity to analyze, to deconstruct, and to predict acts as a barrier against deception and catastrophic error. This is a comforting lie. In the forensic analysis of decision-making failures, high competence often functions not as armor, but as a catalyst. The subject does not fall because they are blind to the details. They fall because they see details that do not exist. They construct a narrative of sophistication that envelops them, creating a closed loop where their own intellect validates the error. Consider a subject defined by analytical rigor, a senior engineer, a seasoned investor, or a medical specialist. Their career is built on the identification of subtle patterns that others miss. They are accustomed to being the outlier, the one who sees the signal in the noise. When presented with a scenario that appears complex, layered, and inaccessible to the layperson, their guard does not go up. Instead, their engagement deepens. They do not see risk, they see a puzzle worthy of their caliber. The complexity of the trap is not a warning sign, it is the bait. The mechanism at play is the mirror trap. It is a specific form of confirmation bias rooted in intellectual identity. When the subject encounters a system, financial, social, or professional, that mirrors their own complexity, they implicitly trust it. They assume that complexity implies legitimacy. They project their own internal logic onto external chaos. If the structure feels difficult to understand, the subject assumes it must be valuable, because they value their own difficult-to-understand skills. The trap does not need to be real. It only needs to feel as smart as they are. The first stage of the breakdown is the exclusivity filter. The subject dismisses simple warnings as noise intended for the average person. They believe standard protocols apply to the masses, not to the exceptional. When they encounter friction, a regulatory gray area, a loophole, an unorthodox methodology, they reinterpret it as an efficiency rather than a violation. They pride themselves on navigating the gray areas that paralyze others. This reframing turns red flags into markers of insider status. To be skeptical would be to admit they are thinking like a commoner. The second mechanism is the sunk cost of identity. This differs from financial sunk cost. Here, the investment is not money, but the self-conception of being an astute observer. Once the subject has publicly or internally committed to an analysis, any evidence to the contrary becomes an attack on their identity. To admit the error is to admit they are not who they think they are. The brain protects this identity aggressively. It edits reality. Anomalies are rationalized as temporary market fluctuations or misunderstood genius. The intelligence that should be solving the problem is now fully weaponized to defend the mistake. The third mechanism is confirmation through complexity. The subject seeks out data that supports their decision, but specifically prefers data that requires effort to decode. Simple positive feedback is suspicious. Complex, jargon-heavy, or abstract positive feedback feels authentic. The harder the data is to parse, the more the subject feels at home. They are comfortable in the weeds. They do not realize that the weeds are where they are being strangled. They are busy solving micro-problems within the system, oblivious to the fact that the macro system is entirely fabricated or collapsing.
There comes a specific timeline in the timeline of failure where the exit closes. This is rarely external. The door is not locked from the outside. It is sealed from the inside. It occurs when the subject successfully converts a skeptic, when they use their own intellect to convince a peer, a spouse, or a colleague of the validity of the error. They are effectively cementing their own feet to the floor. By articulating the defense, they believe it. The act of persuasion obliterates their own remaining doubts. They are now the architect of the illusion they did not create.
The uncomfortable truth is that skepticism is often inversely proportional to confidence. The confident expert assumes they can spot the flaw. Therefore, if they do not see a flaw, it must not exist. They trust their perception more than the reality of the data. They believe they are the auditors of reality, not participants in it. They forget that the human mind, regardless of IQ, is an engine designed to manufacture meaning, not to discover truth. The subject is not a victim of a scammer or a bad market. They are a victim of their own need for the world to make sense in a way that flatters their intelligence. We stare at these cases and ask how someone so sharp could be so dull. We look for the moment they were tricked, but there is no trick. There is only a mirror. The subject looked into the abyss, saw their own reflection, and fell in love with it. They did not fail despite their intelligence. They failed because of it. The complexity you admire is often just the chaos you haven't yet been forced to survive.